was actually named after Orpah. And that's a true story. When they were writing the birth certificate, someone misspelled Orpah and wrote Oprah, which is just an amazing blessing because I could not be a fan of the Orpah show. It just doesn't sound right. And so anyway, unfortunately, Naomi's husband died, and then tragically her 2 sons died. And so that left Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth without a husband. And in society during that time, this was a tragedy because they couldn't go to Starbucks and get a job. They were almost unemployable, and they didn't have a man to take care of them. And so it would reduce them almost to the status of beggars or a little bit lower than slaves. And so Naomi, the mother-in-law, said to the daughter-in-law, hey, go back home. It's easier there. Maybe God will provide a husband for you there. Go back home. And Orpah did that. No shame in it. That was the easy thing to do. That was a logical thing to do. It totally made sense. But Ruth decided to do something very different. She decided to stay when it would have been much, much easier for her to go. And Naomi tried to talk her out of it, again, very graciously in Ruth 1:15 and 16. Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. Verse 16, but Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Now, here's the great verse that a lot of people use at their weddings, which has always been funny to me because this is actually 2 women talking to each other, but nevertheless, you love to use it at your weddings, and so I'll quote it, but I'm laughing the whole time, okay? Anyway, what she says is, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, somebody help me out. I will stay. Even though it would be easier to go, she says, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and watch this, your God will be my God. She decides, you know what? We're family. I'm choosing your God, the one true God. I'm committing to him, and I'm committing to you. Even though it makes sense to go, I'm going to decide to stay. And that decision, I can't tell you how costly it was for Ruth because she became a little lower than a slave. She was a beggar. And she would go in the fields, or this rich guy, Boaz, an incredible guy, owned these fields, and she'd go and kind of pick up food after the workers had picked it up. If they'd left any, she got to eat, and if they didn't, she didn't get to eat. And Boaz, this amazing guy, heard about her and for some reason had compassion on her. He said, hey, give her some extra food. He said to the guys working in the field, don't you lay a hand on her, because he knew that if there was a woman of her stature out there that they'd take physical advantage of her, and that was just kind of the cost of doing business. And so he said, don't touch her. And it raises the question, why would this rich landowner show compassion on this no-name girl? And the answer is because he had heard her story. He had heard how she stayed with Naomi when it would have been easier for her to go. And watch his response in verse 11 of Ruth 2:11 and 12. Boaz replied, he basically says, I've heard your story. I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland to come and live with the people that you did not know before. You stayed with your mother-in-law. And then he says this, he pronounces a blessing and he says, may the Lord repay you for what you have done. He pronounces a blessing, and neither one of them realize how big this blessing would be, because through a series of unusual events, Boaz ended up marrying Ruth, and suddenly this girl who had no future whatsoever in making this faithful decision, now she's one of 2 women who had books of the Bible named after her, and if you trace the lineage of Jesus, you will see that he came from her bloodline. Her total life has changed. Why? Because she decided to stay when it would have been easier to go. Now, don't miss the power of this. She didn't stay hoping God would bless her. She stayed because she believed it was right. And God blessed her because she did what was right. all of us, at some point in our lives, we're going to come to a crossroad, and we're going to have to make a decision. Should I stay the course when it would be easier to walk away? The big question we've been asking in this series of messages, and I want to ask it again and have you think about it, should be a relatively easy question to answer, and that is this question for you to ponder in the beginning of a new year. The question is this: what does God want you to want? You should be able to answer that when you look at your life. There's something in your life that's not where it could be, should be, where God would want it to be. What does God want you to want? It might be He wants you to spend more time with your family, or to help develop them spiritually, or to maybe develop yourself spiritually because you're not really growing as a follower of Jesus. Or for some of you, it may be to stop pursuing your own dreams and surrender something to God. Or it might be to stop living for things that don't matter. It might be to spend more time at home. Whatever it is, what does God want you to want? In light of what God wants you to want, here's the application question. In light of what God wants you to want, where does God want you to stay? Where does God want you to stay the course so that you can live the story that God wants you to tell? When does God want you to stay the course when it would be easier to walk away? Let me tell you a couple of stories from my own life, and then I'm going to toss it to you and see where you might be called to stay when it would be easier to go. First story, I didn't start playing tennis until I was a freshman in high school, only because I got injured playing baseball, and so I just tried it for a semester. Well, I ended up barely making the team, and I played tennis and football through high school. And my senior year, I was playing in the semifinals of the state championship against a guy who was undefeated, and a college scout from one of the top NAIA-ranked schools in the country came out to watch my opponent play because he was favored to win the tournament. And lo and behold, I played out of my brains and wiped the court up with this guy, smeared him. I walked off the court. The coach, the recruiter, walked past him, walked up to me, and offered me a 4-year full scholarship to this awesome university. Then he left. I went and played in the finals against a guy that I'd beaten 2 weeks before, and he wiped the court up with me. I played the worst match ever. The moral of the story is the recruiter should have stayed, but instead he left. And what he ended up doing is he recruited a guy, me, who was totally unqualified to play for this school. My next year, I got there all excited, and I was totally outclassed. I was the only American on an all-Australian team, and God is my witness. The only reason they kept me is because I had the only car. I was the transportation. We were ranked probably 3, maybe 4 in the country during the year. I was the 6th guy on the team. I was the last player. All my teammates, they were like midway through. 16-0 was the record. 15-1, 14-2. Here's Groeschel, 2-14. I had only won 2 matches, and one of them, the guy didn't even show up. It was default, And so, I'm embarrassed. I'm devastated. I'm getting beat up all the time. And so we played another match. All 5 of my teammates won easily, and I lost. Not only did I lose, I lost 6-0, 6-0. I wasn't a Christian, so what I did is I'm not proud of, but I took my rackets afterwards. I smashed them, and then I let out a stream of cuss words that would have made a sailor proud, and I declared to everybody within earshot, I quit. I walked by my coach and said, I'm done, replace me. And I went up to my dorm room, and I couldn't take it anymore. I was humiliated. Well, one of my fraternity brothers called my high school tennis coach, who lived about 90 minutes away, and told him what had happened. And this stud of a person got in his car without me knowing, drove an hour and a half, came to my dorm room. I'm still in there stewing, I'm done. knocks on the door, I open the door, and there's my high school tennis coach, and he runs in and he goes, Groeschel, you are not a quitter. You are not a quitter. You are not a quitter. I forbid you to quit. I didn't invest my time in you for you to quit. You are not a quitter. You're a finisher. You get your butt back out there. You apologize and you finish what we started. Do you understand? I was like, yes, sir. And I did exactly what he told me to do. I went back out and told my coach, I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. If you'll give me a chance, I'll work harder than anybody on the team. And the powerful part of the story is not that this is true. It's not that 2 years later I actually went undefeated in the regular season. In my senior year, was actually given the top athletic award for the whole university. That's not the great part of the story. The great part of the story is God used a very incredible man to plant within me the truth that sometimes it's better to stay than it is to go. I am not a quitter with the help of God. I am a finisher. Jesus is the author and the finisher and the perfecter of my faith. Some of you need to hear that today because God is going to show you it's better to stay when you want to go. I'll tell you one more story. This one's very personal to me and one of the best decisions I ever made. When people think of the church, sometimes they think of me because they see me, but I want you to know that the strength of this church is in you and it's in the leaders behind the scenes. It's not in me. I have 4 men that I've served with since 1999. 2 of them were before that, but we've had a 5-person team known as the Directional Leadership Team. It's me, Jerry Hurley, Bobby Grunwald, Kevin Pennery, and Sam Roberts, and we've been together since 1999. These are extraordinary leaders. They were all in business, left big careers to come and join the church staff. They're world-class leaders, and they are the strength that you rarely see behind the scenes of this organization. Well, midway through, we went from about 1,000 people at one location to, 10 or 12,000 people at 7 locations. And we were plowing new ground in the multi-site way of doing church. Hadn't been done before, nobody knew how to do it. And what happened is we kind of outgrew our own understanding of how to lead the organization. And suddenly we had a lot of behind-the-scenes problems. Miscommunication, our systems weren't set up well, we didn't know how to communicate well, people were being left out. And suddenly they were having to make decisions without me, I was making decisions, we were making different decisions. I didn't like the decisions they were making, they didn't like the way I handled the response, and all of a sudden we were at odds in a significant way for the first time in history. They said some hurtful things, I said some hurtful things. It got bad, and there all of a sudden we've got the executive leadership that's really not trusting one another. I talked to my other friends, my senior pastors, consultants, who are like, hey, you just have to replace them. You can't have that, you can't tolerate it. And so I thought, I hate to do this, but that's what I'm going to have to do. Well, I prayed and prayed and prayed, and I really felt like God, even though I couldn't see the road to healing this relationship, even though it seemed like the road was too difficult and not worth it, I really felt like God led me to stay with the men who'd been faithful to help build this. And so it started with an apology on my part. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done this, and I should have done this, and I should have done that. And then it was followed by an apology on their part. And over a series of events through the next few months, we 100% rebuilt our trust. I want you to know it's extraordinarily rare to see any organization grow from 1,000 attenders to 50,000, one location to 15 locations, going on 18, with an executive group that stays together. It's one of the best decisions that I ever made to press through the pain, to have the hard conversations, to live through the awkwardness, to keep together a team that is now unparalleled in loyalty and understanding and faithfulness. They could have all left at any time and made more money somewhere else. Consulting, there's not a church in the world wouldn't want to pick those guys off. They decided to stay, and I decided to stay with them. Sometimes you're going to come to a place where it doesn't look easy. The road back seems like it's too difficult. And I'm here to tell you that God is going to call you to stay the course when you would rather go the other way. I want to ask you, in light of what God wants you to want, where do you need to stay? in light of the story that God wants you to tell.